They knew not the Lord, but they were the ones that were ministering to the people that came to the house of God. So here were people coming to church, and when they got to church, the ones that were over the things of the Lord were people that didn't even know the Lord.
Amen.
Let that sink in for just a moment. We're just about there today. No longer are the things of the Lord, do they belong to the Lord, and no longer do they belong to people that have been called by God. Now we've raised a generation of ministers that it's just a job, it's an occupation. I want to tell you something. I'm not on a bandwagon, but I hope with all that's in me that Hickory Grove knows what kind of pastor you have. There's not very many churches that have a preacher that's been there that long and been faithful to God and serve the Lord and try to train others and raise up others and remain faithful to God for 40 years plus. You don't hear that today. In fact, most places they have preachers that they don't even know if they're saved or God called, or they don't know anything about the things of God. Those were the very ones that were taking care of spiritual matters, and they didn't even know they were saved.
Come on now.
A church that I've held revivals in for many years, I will be going to this year. And it has nothing to do with me. The church is just about to close their doors. They've always prospered and souls been saved. And their leader called me a few days ago and said, "Preacher, we need to cancel the revival." There's a few churches, a handful of churches. I've gone to, I've been up at Yankee Hill over 30 years straight, down here for 30 years now. And there's a few churches for years I've gone to. And I said, "Brother, what's the problem?" He said, "We got a big problem." Said they finally convinced us we needed a pastor. They convinced us the best way to do it was to look at people's resume. And when we started meeting, the leaders come together. A few of them rose up and we said, "We need to pray about this." And they said, "What's prayer got to do with it? We need to get somebody that's qualified." Said our preacher came in the pulpit a few days ago and said he preached a message, and after I called him aside and I looked at him, he said, "I wasn't being smart. I want to know the answer." And I said to him, "Pastor, have you been saved? Are you born again?" And he looked back at me and said, "What does being born again have to do with anything? You don't have to be born again to preach. All you have to do is have a good education." And now we're at a place where we have people that are trying to take care of the things of God that don't even know God. But I want you to know something. You may not like what I'm about to say, but one thing you'll know for sure, this old boy knows the Lord, and he knows him. All they cared about was themselves.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm amazed at how many New Testament Christians don't even know the Old Testament types and shadows. How God had always put into motion a plan for provision of His people from His house. Do you know everything you ever need in life? You'll get it at church. Really? I don't think there's a problem you'll have in your life. There's not an answer to it somewhere in this book.
Amen.
He'll provide you, give you wisdom, give you peace, give you comfort, give you direction. He'll fill your heart with His precious Spirit. I'm telling you, everything you need you can find right here tonight. Not in me, not in any of these Christians, but the very fact that this place is set aside and sanctified for the glory of God and the presence of God. And everything we need we can find in God's house.
Amen.
Well, God set it up that way. In fact, when they would go to the house of God, there were laws that were in place. they would have to bring their sacrifice. When they brought their sacrifice, now the priest would offer up the sacrifice. There were certain rituals that had to take place when the sacrifice was offered. One of the things was the priest got to keep the skin of the sacrifice. That was their gift. As a memorial, they were to care for that. The reason that they got the skin, according to Leviticus, they got the skin in case anyone ever came back and questioned if people had forgiveness and had atonement by the blood. The skin was proof that the sacrifice had been given. That's why you need to know Jesus died on the cross and shed His blood, but He left us the skin. You don't have any other evidence of what it says right here. This is the evidence of everything that we'll ever need in our life to tell a lost world. Somebody said, how do you know you're saved? And I know I'm saved because this book says that I'm saved. God's word will never change it. He's plenty sure.
Amen.
Then the other thing they would do, all of the fat of the sacrifice belonged only to God. Nobody got any of the fat. The fat's what gave everything its flavor. God got the best. Thank all three of you for the amen. Oh, God don't get the best anymore. He gets the leftovers. God got the best, all the fat. And then here's what they would do. See, they would prepare to have a meal. And they put the flesh in what was called a seething pot to boil the flesh that's to be offered of the sacrifice, because they were to consume the sacrifice. Not only was the blood shed as a covering, but also they were to consume that. You remember they received that direction from God with the Passover. Not only put the blood on the doorpost, but they were to roast the lamb and eat the lamb. Because we're to have the blood on the outside and the lamb on the inside. We're to have the sacrifice within us. You're to have Christ in you. So what they would do, God said the priests, they need to be taken care of too. So God gave them flesh hooks, long poles, usually 3 hooks on it. And when the flesh was boiling in the seething pot, they would stick the flesh hook down in and pull it out. Whatever remained on the hooks, that was for the priest to eat and live off of. But these corrupt priests didn't want that. They wanted the best. So instead of reaching in with the flesh hooks and pulling out what God intended them to have. See, it was an act of faith. God was telling the priest, you live by faith. I'll provide for you. I'll give you what you need. It may not be what you want, but I'll give you what you need to survive. But instead they said, I want the best. So when people would come to offer their sacrifice, before they ever put it in the seething pot, they would just take out the best for themselves. Take care of themselves. That's all they cared about was themselves.
That's right, you are today.
Any time at a church that all you care about and see people all they care about is themselves, it won't be long till that church will go in the wrong direction.
Amen.
Worship.